Chapter 1. The unexpected breakfast in the misty heights of Asgard, where the gods' halls gleamed as though polished with starlight. Thor awoke one morning with a roar that made the clouds tremble. He was not the kind to wake up with a smile and a cup of coffee. No, Thor woke like a thunderstorm that had just realized it forgot to rain. His red beard stuck out in every direction as though it had a will of its own, and his eyes flashed like lightning bolts, searching for a target. "Oh, my hammer, where's my Mjolnir?" he muttered, groping around in his enormous bed, big enough to host an entire Viking feast. But it wasn't the hammer missing this time. No, this was much worse. Something that made his stomach growl like an angry bear. Thor got up, his muscular body creaking like old oaks in the wind, and stomped out of his chamber. The hall outside echoed with his footsteps, and the servants, minor Aesir scurrying about like stressed ants, scrambled out of the way. "Where are my goats?" he roared so loudly the windows rattled. "Tanngrisnir, Tanngnjóstr, get over here, you lazy, horned layabouts." But no answer came. No bleating, no clatter of hooves on the golden floors. Thor scratched his beard and frowned. His goats weren't just animals, they were his loyal companions, the ones who pulled his chariot through the sky so fast it created thunder. And best of all, they were endlessly reusable. Each evening he could slaughter them, feast on their juicy meat until he was as full as a god after a banquet, and by morning they would be whole again, as long as the bones remained unbroken and wrapped in their hides. It was like an eternal buffet on wheels, perfect for a god with an appetite like a bottomless pit. Thor marched to the stables, where his chariot stood parked like an ancient sports car. But instead of two majestic goats with corkscrew horns, there were only empty harnesses. "What in Helheim?" he bellowed, smashing his fist into the wall so hard that part of Asgard's fortification crumbled down into Midgard, probably landing on some poor farmer's roof. He sniffed the air. It smelled of giant, that stale, earthy scent of rock and mountain mixed with a hint of unwashed sweat. "Giants," Thor growled. "Those cursed frost giants have stolen my goats. They'll taste my hammer for this." But wait. How had the giants gotten into Asgard? The Bifrost bridge was guarded by Heimdall, who could hear grass grow and see an ant cross a continent. Maybe they'd sneaked in at night disguised as clouds or something equally ridiculous. Thor chuckled at the thought, a giant in a cloud costume, trying to look fluffy with huge knobby hands. He summoned Loki, his cunning half-brother, who always appeared when trouble was brewing. Loki sauntered in, wearing his usual green cloak, smiling like a snake that had just swallowed a mouse. "What now, Thor? Lost your hammer again? Or is it your dignity this time? Not the hammer, you fool, my goats, stolen by giants." Thor pointed at the empty harnesses as if it weren't obvious. Loki raised an eyebrow. "Goats, those bleating meat machines. Why would giants want them? They have mountain goats of their own, though probably not magical ones. Maybe they're starting a restaurant chain in Jotunheim. Eternal grill, all you can eat, they grow back." Thor didn't laugh. He was too hungry for jokes. "We have to find them. No goats, no chariot, no thunder, no breakfast." Loki nodded seriously, though his eyes glimmered with mischief. "All right, big brother, let's track those thieves. But first, maybe we should eat something. You look like you could devour a whale." Thor's stomach rumbled in agreement, and the two gods sat at Valhalla's great table. Odin, the one-eyed All-Father, was already there, staring into his rune staff. "What's all the racket so early?" he grumbled. "My goats are gone," Thor declared, tearing into a steak the size of a cow. Odin sighed. "Again. Last time it was that farmer Thjalfi who mishandled them. Now giants, you should put a GPS on those animals." "GPS?" Thor asked, puzzled. "Never mind," Odin said with a wave. "Go to Jotunheim and retrieve them. But be careful, giants are craftier than they look." Thor nodded, but inside he was boiling with rage. How dare they? His goats weren't just food, they were family. Well, edible family, but still family. With Loki at his side, Thor strapped Mjolnir to his belt and stepped onto Bifrost. The bridge shimmered in rainbow colors, and Heimdall stood watch as always, Gjallarhorn hanging at his side. "Seen any giants sneaking by?" Thor asked. Heimdall shook his head. "No giants, but I heard bleating last night far off in Jotunheim, and laughter, deep, booming laughter." "That's enough for me," said Thor. We are heading there. Without his chariot, they had to walk, an unfamiliar feeling for Thor. His legs were used to riding, not trudging. Loki complained the whole way, "This is humiliating, gods walking like mortals. What's next? They'll steal our shoes." They crossed mountains and valleys, through forests where trees whispered secrets and rivers chuckled at their feet. Jotunheim loomed ahead, enormous living mountains with snow-capped peaks scraping the sky. The air was cold, the wind biting like an angry wolf. At last they reached a massive cave, voices echoing from within. Thor crept closer, yes, crept, despite being as big as an ox. Inside, two giants, Thrym and his brother Thjazi, sat around a fire. And there, tied to a rock, stood Tanngrisnir and Tanngnjóstr, bleating pitifully. "Ha! These goats are worth their weight in gold," laughed Thrym, his voice like thunder without Thor's refinement. "We can feast every day and never go hungry." "Yeah, and sell their magic hides to the dwarves for a fortune," added Thjazi, picking his teeth with a bone. Thor seethed. "They're mine," he whispered to Loki. Let's make a plan," Loki said. "You can't just storm in there 2 against 1 and you're without your chariot." "I'm Thor. I always storm in," Thor protested, but Loki held him back. "Wait, look, they're about to cook dinner. Maybe we can infiltrate." Thor eyed Loki suspiciously. His plans usually involved disguises, lies, and a heap of chaos. But what choice did he have? His stomach growled again, and the goats looked so sad. Fine, Thor thought, this should be interesting. The two gods crept into the cave, hiding behind rocks. Loki whispered a spell, transforming into a fly buzzing around the giants' heads. Thor hid behind a boulder, waiting for the signal. Thrym stood up and approached the goats. "Which one should we eat first?" "The curly-horned one," Tanngrisnir bleated in protest, and Thor felt a surge of anger. But Loki fly landed on Thrym's nose and bit down. "Ow, cursed insect!" roared the giant, swatting wildly. In the chaos, Thor sneaked forward, but tripped over a stone. Thunk! The sound echoed and the giant spun around. "Who's there?" shouted Thjazi. Thor rose to his full height, hammer in hand. "It's me, Thor." "Return my goats, you thieving slabs of rock." The giants laughed. "Thor without a chariot? You're like a cat without claws." The fight erupted. Thor swung Mjolnir, slamming Thrym in the gut with a crash that shook the cave. Thjazi grabbed a club as big as a tree, but Loki, now back in god form, tripped him with a crafty foot. "Take this, you oaf," Thor yelled, ducking as a flying rock whizzed by, but the giants were strong. Thrym grabbed Thor in a bear hug that squeezed the air from his lungs. "Now you'll be pulp," Thor struggled, but without full strength, he was starving. Things looked grim. Loki darted about, distracting them, but it wasn't enough. Then the unexpected happened. The goats, seeing their master in peril, gnawed through their ropes. Tanngrisnir rammed Thjazi so hard in the backside he slammed into the wall, while Tanngnjóstr bit Thrym on the leg. "Youch!" the giants bellowed in unison. Thor laughed loudly, breaking free. "Good work, my friends." Together they chased the giants out of the cave, the massive brutes fleeing like frightened chickens. "We'll be back," Thrym shouted over his shoulder. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Thor yelled back. With the goats safe, he hitched them to the right. The chariot was still in Asgard. Guess we're walking home," he sighed. But on the way back, they laughed about the adventure. Loki mimicked the giant's screams, and Thor vowed never again to leave his goats unguarded. Or so he thought, but this was only the beginning. Chapter 2, Loki and the ridiculous disguise. Back in Asgard, the mood was about as cheerful as a damp wool blanket. Thor may have rescued his goats, Tanngrisnir and Tanngnjóstr, from the bumbling frost giants Thrym and Thjazi, but he was still as grumpy as a thundercloud with stomach pains. Walking all the way from Jotunheim without his chariot had done nothing to improve his mood. His boots were muddy, his beard was tangled, and his stomach growled so loudly it echoed across Valhalla's rafters. Worst of all, he had a nagging feeling it wasn't over. Giants don't give up so easily, especially not after being humiliated by 2 goats and a god with a hammer. Loki, meanwhile, was in his most insufferable mood. He sat at Valhalla's great oak table, feet up, mug of mead in hand, taunting Thor. "So, big brother," he said, with a grin so wide his teeth gleamed like polished emeralds, I thought you were the god of thunder, not the god of long walks. What happened? Get blisters on your feet? Thor hurled a bread loaf the size of a shield at Loki, who ducked with an elegant pirouette. Shut it, you sly snake. If you hadn't been buzzing around like a fly, we might have made it home before sunset. Odin, sitting in his high seat carving a rune, raised his single eyebrow. You two sound like an old married couple. Can you stop bickering and tell me what actually happened? Thor sighed and slumped onto a bench, which groaned under his weight. The giants stole my goats. We got them back. But I don't trust those lumps of stone. They'll try again. I feel it in my beard. Loki nodded, unusually serious for once. He's right, Odin. Thrym and Thjazi aren't the smartest giants in Jotunheim, but they're stubborn. And I heard them whispering about a plan, something about revenge and showing Asgard who's boss. They might be plotting something bigger. Odin leaned forward, his ravens Hugin and Mjolnir croaking on his shoulders. If the giants dare come here again, we must be ready. But first, we need to know what they're planning. Thor, you're good at smashing things. Loki, you're good at, well, everything else. Find out what they're up to. Thor grumbled. Me, spy. I'm no sneak, I'm a crusher. Exactly why you need me, said Loki, tossing his hair as if starring in a shampoo ad for gods. I have a plan, a brilliant plan, a plan so genius even Frasier would be jealous. Thor eyed him suspiciously. Loki's plans tended to end with someone, usually Thor, looking ridiculous. Like that time Loki talked him into dressing as a bride to get Mjolnir back. Thor shuddered at the memory of that dress. What plan? He demanded. Loki grinned like a fox in a henhouse. We go back to Jotunheim. But this time undercover, disguised. No one will suspect it's us. Disguised as what? Thor muttered. Clouds again? I refuse to be a fluffy cumulonimbus. Better, Loki said, leaning closer. We disguise ourselves as giants, Thor gaped. Giants? Look at me. I may be big, but I don't smell like a wet cave. And you're as skinny as a willow twig. No one will believe you're a giant. Loki waved the objection away. Trust me, I'm a master of transformation. A little magic, a little theater, and we'll blend in like ice cubes in a snowstorm. Thor reluctantly agreed, mostly because he didn't have a better idea, and because he really wanted to give Thrym and Thjazi a beating. They went to Loki's chamber, where he rummaged through his collection of mystical oddities, a pouch of sparkling powder, a cloak that shifted colors like a chameleon, and something that looked like a dead skunk, but which Loki swore was authentic giant cologne. First Loki transformed himself. With a spell and a dramatic flourish, he doubled in size, his skin turned granite gray, and his hair tangled into a bird's nest. He looked like a giant who just rolled down a mountain. What do you think? He asked, spinning around, his massive boots knocking over a chair. Thor grimaced. You look like you ate too many beans and exploded. Do me now. Loki sprinkled powder over Thor, muttered an incantation, and suddenly Thor felt himself swell. His arms thickened like oak trunks, his beard grew into a thicket big enough to hide a flock of birds, and his clothes became a coarse tunic that reeked of, well, giant. What is this stench? He roared. Authenticity, Loki said cheerfully. Now we're ready, but one more thing, we need names, giant names. I'll be Lochgrim the Cunning, you can be Torbjorn the Thick. Torbjorn? Thor bellowed. I'm Thor, god of thunder. Not some Torbjorn. SHH, said Loki. No one must know it's us. Now let's get to Jotunheim and spy. The two giants headed for Bifrost, where Heimdall gave them a skeptical look. What's this circus? He asked. Just two friendly giants heading home, Loki boomed in an exaggerated giant voice that sounded like a frog in an earthquake. Heimdall rolled his eyes, but let them pass. In Jotunheim, they trudged through barren, snow-covered landscapes where the wind howled like a chorus of angry wolves. Thor, or rather Torbjorn, struggled to keep up with Loki, his new body awkward and clumsy. He tripped over a rock and landed face first in a snowdrift. This is your worst idea ever, he muttered, spitting snow. Stop complaining, said Loki. Look over there. Thrym's fortress. Ahead loomed a massive black stone fortress, its towers looking as though carved by a drunken sculptor. Voices echoed out, and the smell of roasting meat drifted through the air. Thor sniffed. Is that goat? Loki nodded. They haven't learned their lesson. Come on, let's sneak in. They approached the fortress, where giants feasted at long tables. Thrym sat at the high seat, crowned with ice, bragging about his latest scheme. "We stole Thor's goats once, and we'll do it again," he bellowed. "But this time we'll take his hammer too." Thor clenched his enormous fists, but Loki held him back. "Easy, Torbjorn, we need to be smart. Listen first." They mingled with the giants, which was easier than expected. Most were too drunk on mead to notice. Thor tried to act like a giant by eating an entire ox himself, earning cheers from the others. "That Torbjorn can eat," shouted one giant, slapping him on the back so hard mead sloshed through his beard. Meanwhile, Loki slipped through the hall, eavesdropping. He overheard talk of a trap. The giants had hidden Thor's goats in a secret cave guarded by a sorcerer named Skrymir, who could cast illusions so real even Odin would be fooled. "We need to find that cave," Loki whispered to Thor as they sat pretending to drink mead. Thor nodded, though his eyes were fixed on a giant slab of meat. "Focus," Loki hissed. Suddenly Thrym stood and raised his mug. "To our next victory over Thor, we'll lure him here, steal his hammer, and make him our servant." Thor couldn't hold back. He leapt to his feet, his disguise cracking, and roared. "No one steals my hammer." His voice boomed like thunder, and the giants froze in confusion. I mean, no one steals Torbjorn's ox." He tried to recover, but it was too late. Thrym pointed at him. "It's Thor." "Get him!" Chaos erupted. Giants hurled tables and mugs while Thor swung Mjolnir, which he'd hidden under his tunic. Loki transformed into a raven and flapped up to the rafters, shouting. "I told you to be discreet." Thor fought like mad, but there were too many giants. Just when it seemed hopeless, something unexpected happened again. Tanngrisnir and Tanngnjóstr, who had apparently escaped from the cave on their own, they were magical goats, after all, came galloping into the fortress, bleating like an army. They buted giants left and right, and Thor laughed so hard he nearly dropped his hammer. With the goats' help, Thor and Loki escaped into the night as the giants cursed and threw rocks after them. "We're not done with you, Thor," Thrym shouted. "You're the ones not done with me," Thor bellowed back. Back in Asgard, with the goats safe again, Thor and Loki sat to catch their breath, but Loki looked uneasy. "They mentioned Skrymir," he said. "That sorcerer is dangerous, and I don't think the goats escaped on their own. Something's going on." Thor nodded. "Then we find this Skrymir and smash his plans." Chapter 3. The Cursed Fish and Thor's dance. The golden halls of Asgard lay wrapped in a morning so clear that even the stars seemed jealous. But inside Valhalla, the mood was anything but bright. Thor, god of thunder, stood with arms crossed, glaring at Loki, as if considering using him for Mjolnir target practice. The goats Tanngrisnir and Tanngnjóstr were back in the stable after their latest escapade in Jotunheim, where they had heroically buted the giants Thrym and Thjazi. But Thor was not pleased. His beard quivered with suspicion, and his stomach growled with hunger, a dangerous combination. "It's not over," he growled, knocking Mjolnir on the table hard enough to make the plates jump. "Those giants are planning something, and I swear by Odin's beard, if they touch my goats again, Jotunheim will be a pile of rubble." Loki, sprawled out on a bench, tossing a glittering orb in the air, probably stolen from some dwarf, grinned. "You're so dramatic, Thor. We got the goats back, we scared the giants, and you ate an entire ox for breakfast. What's the problem?" "The problem," said Thor, leaning so close his beard practically brushed Loki's nose, "is that you said they were safe. And then they escaped. How in Helheim do magical goats escape from a cave guarded by giants?" Odin, seated on his high throne sipping something that smelled like ancient wine, raised his single eyebrow. "He has a point, Loki. The goats are no ordinary beasts. If they escaped, it's likely someone helped them, or something." Loki caught the orb and sat up. Okay, maybe there's a brain behind all this. I heard rumors in Jotunheim about a sorcerer named Skrymir. He's not like Thrym and Thjazi, they're like clumsy oxen. Skrymir is cunning, a master of illusions. If he's involved, maybe he tricked the goats into running away to lure us into a trap." Thor grunted. "A sorcerer? Perfect. I'll smash him with Mjolnir, problem solved." Loki rolled his eyes. "Yes, because that always fixes everything." "No, Thor, we need a plan, a smart plan. We have to find Skrymir." learn what he wants, and beat him at his own game. I don't like your plans, muttered Thor. Last time I ended up Thorbjorn the Thick and smelled like a swamp. This time will be better, said Loki, leaping to his feet, his cloak flaring like he was on his way to a Midgard fashion show. We'll go to Jotunheim, but not as giants or merchants. We'll infiltrate his court as entertainers, Thor gaped. Entertainers. What am I supposed to do, juggle Mjolnir? Exactly, Loki clapped his hands. Or well, maybe not juggling, but Skrymir loves spectacle. He's got a court full of giants, trolls, and other weird creatures who love shows. We'll disguise ourselves as a troupe of traveling performers. I'll sing, you dance. Dance? Roared Thor so loudly that one of Odin's ravens, Hugin, fell off his perch in shock. Odin laughed, a rare sound that made the whole of Valhalla stop to listen. That I'd like to see, but be careful, Skrymir is no fool. Reluctantly, Thor agreed to the plan, mostly because he couldn't think of a better one, and because the idea of smashing a sorcerer still sounded appealing. Loki dove into preparations with an enthusiasm bordering on madness. He stitched up costumes, a glittering green cloak for himself, complete with feathers that looked suspiciously stolen from a very angry bird, and for Thor, well, a sort of tunic that was part warrior's armor, part jester's outfit, with bells that jingled at every step. I look like a fool, Thor growled, staring at his reflection in a polished shield. You look fantastic, said Loki, adjusting a feather in his hat. Now let's practice. I'll sing a ballad of Thor's heroic deeds, and you do a dance to show your strength. Maybe hammer strikes in rhythm. Thor raised Mjolnir threateningly. I don't dance. But Loki was relentless, and after an hour of persuasion and the promise of an extra barrel of mead, Thor was swinging his hammer in what could vaguely be called a rhythm. It mostly looked like he was trying to smash an invisible enemy, but Loki clapped enthusiastically. Perfect, they'll love it. They set off for Jotunheim, where Skrymir's fortress loomed out of the mist like a mountain with a bad attitude. The gates were guarded by two giants who looked like they'd been chewing rocks for breakfast, but Loki, playing Lokebrand the legendary skald, charmed them with an improvised song about their strength. Your arms are like mountains, your beards like forests, he sang, and the giants, unaccustomed to compliments, waved them inside. Within the fortress, Skrymir's court was a chaotic mix of giants, trolls, and creatures that looked as if they'd escaped from a nightmare. Skrymir himself sat on an icy throne, his pointed beard glittering in the light of glowing crystals. What have we here? He said, his voice smooth as an icy wind. Entertainers? Good. Impress me, or you'll be dinner. Loki bowed so low his feathers brushed the floor. Mighty Skrymir, we are Lokebrand and Thorvald, the greatest performers in the 9 worlds. Allow us to enchant you. Thor, trying very hard not to look like he hated every moment, stepped forward and began his dance. He swung Mjolnir in huge dramatic arcs, each strike making the floor shake, the bells on his tunic jingling like a deranged orchestra. The giants cheered, mostly because they were afraid of being hit if they didn't. Loki sang a ballad of Thor's deeds, but slipped clues about the goats into the lyrics. His goats so mighty, with horns that can shatter mountains, hidden in shadows, yet soon free again. Skrymir raised an eyebrow but said nothing, his eyes narrowing. In the middle of the performance, something unexpected happened. Tanngrisnir and Tanngnjóstr, who had apparently escaped again, how did they keep doing that? Came galloping into the hall, bleating like an army on the march. They buted a giant carrying a platter of food, and chaos erupted. Skrymir hurled a spell, and suddenly the room was full of illusions, copies of Thor all performing the same ridiculous dance. What in Helheim? Bellowed Thor, smashing one illusion, which vanished in a puff of smoke. Loki, quick as ever, transformed into a raven and darted around the hall, searching for the real Skrymir. There, he croaked, hurling what else? One of Freyja's apples straight at the sorcerer's forehead. Skrymir staggered, and the illusions dissolved. Thor seized the sorcerer and raised Mjolnir. Where are my goats? Speak, or you'll be a stain on the floor. Skrymir laughed, even as Thor held him fast. Your goats are not here. They're part of a greater plan. Thrym and Thjazi have them, and they're about to change the balance of the world. Thor and Loki escaped with the goats, who bleated triumphantly, but Skrymir's words echoed in their heads. What was the greater plan, and how could they stop it? Chapter 4. The great goat trap. Asgard lay shrouded in a morning fog so thick that even Odin's ravens struggled to find each other. Thor stood outside his stable, inspecting Tanngrisnir and Tanngnjóstr, who bleated happily while chewing on something suspiciously resembling Freyja's rose bushes. After their recent adventure in Jotunheim, where they had escaped Skrymir's cage and knocked the sorcerer out with a well-placed apple, Thor was on high alert. His beard practically vibrated with suspicion. "You two," he said to the goats, pointing with a meat-covered finger, "stay here. No more escapes, no more heroic buttings without my permission." The goats responded with bleats that sounded like a mixture of mockery and indifference, and Thor sighed. "Why do I get the feeling you're smarter than me?" Inside Valhalla, the atmosphere was taut as a bowstring. Loki sat on a bench, sharpening a knife with the expression of someone planning to slice reality itself. Odin, in his high throne, stared into a runestone as if it could reveal all the secrets of Jotunheim. "Skrymir won't give up," he said, his voice like distant thunder. "He's too cunning to be stopped by an apple to the head. And if he's working with Thrym and Thjazi, we have a bigger problem than stolen goats." Thor tapped Mjolnir on the table, making the mugs jump. "Let them come. I'll smash them all, sorcerer giants, the whole of Jotunheim if needed." Loki rolled his eyes. "So elegant, Thor, but smash, smash, smash isn't always the answer. Skrymir is a master of illusions. He can make you think you're fighting an army when you're really just pounding on a poor rock." "Then we'll trick him first," said Thor, and for the first time that morning he smiled. "You're good at that, Loki. What's the plan this time?" "No more merchants, I hope." Loki tossed the knife in the air and caught it with a dramatic flourish. "No merchants. This time we build a trap. Skrymir wants your goats, right? We'll use them as bait. We'll pretend to leave them unguarded, lure him to Asgard, and when he shows up, bam, we catch him in his own game." Thor frowned. "Use my goats as bait? Are you insane? What if he steals them again?" "That's the risk we take," said Loki, leaning forward, eyes glittering like a fire at night. "But we'll be ready. I've got an idea for a trap so ridiculous even Skrymir won't see it coming." Odin nodded slowly. "Do it. But if you destroy half of Asgard again, you clean it up yourselves." The plan went into action. Loki, who never did anything halfway, transformed part of Asgard's meadows into what he called the ultimate goat trap. He and Thor built a fake grazing field right at the edge of Asgard, near the Bifrost. The field was filled with lush grass, surprisingly hard to find in the realm of gods, sparkling dew that looked magical thanks to Loki's magic powder, and a huge sign that read, "Thor's Goats." Free buffet. The sign was Thor's idea, mostly because he thought it was funny. "Are you sure this isn't too obvious?" asked Thor, tying the goats to a post, ropes that looked weak, but were actually reinforced with dwarven magic fibers. Loki grinned. "Skrymir is clever, but he's also greedy. He'll think you're dumb enough to leave the goats unguarded, and when he tries to take them, the trap activates." The trap was a masterpiece, even by Loki's standards. Beneath the pasture, he had hidden a magical cage, invisible to the naked eye, that would snap shut the moment anyone touched the goats. He had rigged the entire field with illusions, fake Thors appearing and disappearing, thunderclouds that weren't real, and even a fake Mjolnir floating in the air to scare intruders. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" said Thor, impressed despite himself. "Almost," said Loki. "The only thing I didn't account for is that you might destroy everything by rushing in and fighting too early." Thor grunted, but agreed to stay hidden. The two gods took position behind a hill, watched over by Heimdall, who muttered about being tired of keeping an eye on their madness. Tanngrisnir and Tanngnjóstr bleated happily, unaware that they were stars in Loki's latest theatrical production. Hours passed, the sun climbed across the sky, and Thor grew impatient. "Where is he? If I have to sit here much longer, I'll eat my own boots." "Shh," hissed Loki. "Do you hear that?" A low rumble sounded, as if the mountain itself were sighing. And then, out of the mist, Skrymir appeared not as himself, but disguised as an old woman with a basket in hand. His illusion was so perfect that even Thor raised an eyebrow. "Is it Freyja?" "No, you ox," whispered Loki. Look at the feet. No old woman has toes the size of boulders. The fake woman approached the goats, mumbling something about sweet little critters, and reached out a knobby hand to pet Tanngrisnir. At that moment, the trap activated. The ground shook, and a cage of glowing runes rose around Skrymir, who screamed in surprise. What in Jotunheim's name? Ha, got you, roared Thor, leaping forward, Mjolnir raised high, but Skrymir was not finished. With a smile as cold as an ice storm, he cast a spell, and suddenly the field was filled with copies of himself, dozens of old women running around laughing. Thor swung Mjolnir, hitting one, but it vanished in a puff of smoke. Illusions, he growled. Loki, never one to give up, leapt into the chaos. He transformed into a giant hawk and dove at the fake women, one by one, until he found the real Skrymir. There you are, he shouted, hurling yet another of Freyja's apples. Where did he even get all these? Straight at the sorcerer's forehead. Skrymir staggered, and the cage locked around him. Cursed gods, he spat. You think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming. What are you talking about? Roared Thor, raising his hammer threateningly. Skrymir smiled, even while trapped. Thrym and Thjazi already have your goats. This was only a distraction. Check the stable. Thor spun and ran toward the stable, Loki at his heels. There, just as Skrymir had said, the harnesses were empty again. The goats were gone again. How in Helheim? Roared Thor. Loki scratched his head. He must have sent an illusion to the stable while we were busy here. Clever devil. Thor turned to Skrymir, who laughed in his cage. Not a chance, said Thor. You stay there and we'll find my goats, then I'll turn you to dust. Loki nodded. We have to go back to Jotunheim, but this time, Thor, no traps. We go in hard. Thor smiled for the first time all day. Now that's a plan I like. With Skrymir captured and the goats gone again, Thor and Loki set off toward Jotunheim, determined to end the giant schemes once and for all. But what awaited them? And how many apples had Loki actually stolen from Freyja? Chapter 5. The unexpected feast. The golden halls of Asgard lay silent, except for Thor's roar, which echoed like thunder across the realm. His goats, Tanngrisnir and Tanngnjóstr, were gone again. After capturing the sorcerer Skrymir in a magical cage, only to realize that the giants Thrym and Thjazi had tricked them with yet another illusion. Thor's patience was thinner than a dwarf's forging rod. He stood at the Bifrost bridge, Mjolnir in hand, staring out at Jotunheim's snow-covered mountains with a gaze that could melt glaciers. This time, he growled, I'll crush all of Jotunheim if I have to. No one steals my goats and gets away with it. Loki, standing beside him polishing yet another of Freyja's apples, how many did he have, really, tried to calm him down. Thor, my great, bearded friend, calm down. We have Skrymir in the cage, and he knows where the goats are, but if we just storm in and smash everything to bits, we may never learn their plan. We need finesse. Thor spun around so fast that his beard smacked Loki in the face. Finesse, your finesse has given us merchants, giants, and now an empty stable. What's next? Dress me as a goat. Loki grinned, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Tempting, but no, I have a better idea. We know Thrym and Thjazi love parties. They can't resist a proper banquet, so we host one in Jotunheim. We invite them, pretend we want to negotiate for the goats, and when they're drunk on mead, we steal them back. Thor blinked. A party in Jotunheim? Are you sure you haven't had one of Freyja's apples in your head? It's brilliant, Loki exclaimed, tossing the apple into the air. They'll never suspect we're there to trick them. We bring Skrymir as our guest to show good faith, and while they're celebrating, we sneak in and retrieve the goats. Odin, watching from his throne in Valhalla, nodded slowly. Risky, but it could work. Loki, if you completely ruin relations with Jotunheim, you'll answer to Freyja, and she is not happy about her apples. Loki swallowed and nodded. No problem, Allfather, I have it all under control. Thor grunted. That's what you said last time, and now my goats are God knows where. The plan went into action. Loki, never one to do anything halfway, transformed into a messenger and went to Jotunheim carrying an invitation written on magically glittering parchment. It read, Thor, god of thunder, invites the mighty Thrym and Thjazi to a grand feast in Jotunheim to discuss peace and goats. Bring your own mead, and no bad attitude. Loki had insisted on the last line to keep it light-hearted. Back in Asgard, they fetched Skrymir, still sitting in his magical cage, looking like a grumpy cat. "What do you want now?" he growled. "You're coming to the party," Loki said cheerfully. "Try anything, and Thor will use you as a hammer bag." Skrymir glared but stayed silent. Thor, who didn't trust the sorcerer, tied a rope around his waist and dragged him along like an unwilling dog. They arrived in Jotunheim, where Loki had transformed an old cave into a banquet hall worthy of Valhalla. Tables groaned under the weight of food, oxen, pigs, and even a whole whale that Thor insisted on bringing to impress. Mead barrels were lined up, and illusions of dancing lights floated in the air, thanks to Loki's magic. Even Thor was impressed. "Not bad," he muttered, "but where are my goats?" "Patience," Loki whispered. "They're here somewhere. I heard Thrym boasting about them in his fortress." Thrym and Thjazi arrived shortly after, followed by a horde of giants who looked as if they hadn't bathed since Yggdrasil was a sapling. Thrym, wearing his ice-crowned helmet, raised a mug. "Thor, you're hosting a feast. I thought all you could do was fight." Thor clenched his teeth but forced a stiff smile. "I can feast too. But we talk about my goats, or there's no party." Thjazi laughed, his voice like an earthquake. "Goats, maybe we have them, maybe not, but first let's eat." The feast began with a bang. The giants pounced on the food like starving wolves, while Thor tried to stay composed, eating a whole ox by himself. Loki, acting as host, poured mead and cracked jokes that had the giants roaring with laughter. Skrymir, still bound, sat in a corner scowling. Midway through the feast, Loki slipped away, transformed into a mouse, and began snooping around Thrym's fortress, which lay adjacent to the cave. He soon found a secret chamber where Tanngrisnir and Tanngnjóstr were tied up. But that wasn't all. The room was filled with magical traps, glowing runes that could turn a god to ash. "Clever," Loki muttered to himself. But not clever enough. Back at the feast, Thor grew impatient. He had drunk so much mead that his beard seemed to be singing on its own, and he was tired of Thrym's boasting. "Where are my goats?" he finally roared, and silence fell over the cave. Thrym smirked. "You want your goats, they're safe for now. But if you want them back, you must win a contest." "What kind of contest?" asked Thor, hand on Mjolnir. "A eating contest," shouted Thjazi. "You versus us. Whoever eats the most wins the goats." Thor laughed so hard the table shook. "Eat, you don't stand a chance." What the giants didn't know was that Thor's appetite was legendary. He once ate an entire herd of cows in one night and still had room for dessert. The contest began, and the table was piled high with mountains of food, meat, bread, barrels of soup. Thor threw himself into it like a storm, while Thrym and Thjazi struggled to keep up. Loki, sneaking back, whispered to Thor, "I've found the goats, but we need to get past the traps." "Keep them occupied," Thor nodded, mouth full of meat. "No problem," he muttered, shoving a whole chicken down his throat. While the contest raged, Loki returned to the chamber, using his magic to disarm the traps one by one, carefully. One misstep and he'd be a smoked god. Back at the feast, the giants began falling behind. Thrym vomited in a corner, and Thjazi lay passed out under the table, surrounded by empty mugs. "Time to finish this," Thor said, rising, still chewing a leg of ox. He confronted Skrymir, who tried to sneak away. "Not so fast, sorcerer." With a strike from Mjolnir, Thor knocked Skrymir down into a pile of shattered illusions. At that moment, Loki stormed in with the goats, bleating triumphantly. "We've got them," he shouted. The giants, too full and drunk to fight, could only stare as Thor and Loki fastened the goats into a borrowed wagon and raced toward the Bifrost. "You'll regret this," Thrym roared, but his voice was drowned out by Thor's laughter. Back in Asgard, they celebrated with another feast, this time without giants. The goats bleated happily, and even Odin smiled. "Good work," he said. "But next time, Loki, leave Freyja's apples alone." Loki grinned. "No promises, All-Father." And so ended the adventure with Thor's goats, never to be left unguarded again, or so they thought. But that is another story. Epilogue. After the thunder, Asgard lay once again in stillness, or as much stillness as a realm full of gods, dwarves, and braying goats could muster. Thor sat at the great table in Valhalla, with Tanngrisnir and Tanngnjóstr safely in their stall, now guarded by an entire troop of dwarves who swore that not even a mosquito would get past without permission. His hammer, Mjolnir, rested at his side, still warm from the recent adventures in Jotunheim. Before him lay a plate of meat large enough to feed an army, and for the first time in days, his stomach rumbled with satisfaction rather than anger. Loki, who always managed to wriggle out of consequences, sat opposite him, tossing an apple into the air. Yes, yet another one of Freyja's. You have to admit, Thor, he said with a grin, that was fun. Giants, sorcerers, an eating contest. We should do this more often. Thor threw a piece of bread at him, but this time with a smile. If you ever drag my goats into a mess like this again, Loki, I'll tie you to Yggdrasil and let the goats chew on your hair. Loki laughed, but his eyes nervously shifted toward Freyja, who stood in a corner staring at him with a look that could turn a god to ashes. Her apple trees had been suspiciously empty lately, and she had begun asking questions. Odin, from his high seat, observed them both. You saved the goats and Asgard's honor, he said, his voice like a wind over the world's trees. But Jotunheim does not forget. Thrym and Thjazi are licking their wounds, and Skrymir, he is not the type to give up. Thor shrugged. Let them come. I have my goats, my hammer, and a stomach ready for the next feast. And so, as the sunset painted the sky in colors of fire, Asgard continued its eternal life. The goats brayed, the gods laughed, and somewhere in Jotunheim, new schemes were perhaps being hatched. But that was a worry for another day. For now, Thor's world was in balance, until the next adventure, of course.